Happy Monday. Welcome back to the Sports Ticket on the Alive and Social Network. With Kendall Mark, I'm Kevin Gorg. And you are the season ticket holders that make this show go. And also want to thank our sponsors, Coors Light and Patrick McGovern's Pub on West 7th in St. Paul for their great sponsorship as we celebrate a very entertaining and interesting sports weekend. And we want to put our prayers out there for Paris and not forget that real life matters a lot more than what we're going to talk about today. But it sure is nice to have sports, Kendall, to have a little distraction from the bad news from France that we got over the weekend. And sports definitely our diversion. And here on the Sports Ticket, we love our diversion, and we love when our local teams do well. And it was one of those weekends where the Gopher football team played well. Wild had a decent start to the road trip. But I think most sports fans in this market are most excited right now that the Minnesota Vikings are alone on top of the world that is the division, which I think a month ago would have been preposterous to say that the Vikings would be not only at top with Green Bay, but alone in first place. But that's exactly where they are right now.
Right, and I think even just a month ago, Green Bay was still undefeated, and we were, 2-3 at that point. So 3-2 at that point. So it wouldn't have been
unbelievable,
totally unbelievable. And it's funny because somebody in this room thought maybe we would be 6-3 after the weekend. Aaron, could you remind everyone?
Oh, come on.
What was said last week?
I am going to call for a Raider win. I hope I'm wrong, but just crunching the numbers right now, I've got Oakland winning this game 30-27.
Oh, you did you?
No, I think if Aaron would have rolled the entire balance of the tape, I mentioned that I thought the Raiders were going to win, which I stood by. I'm still surprised sitting here today knowing what a trap game that could have been for the Vikings off the emotional game against St. Louis, which it was hard fought. There was a lot of drama involved. Your quarterback gets knocked out. And then the look-ahead factor to Green Bay, which I know these guys with the T-shirts today in the over at Winter Park that say beat the Packers in the back. I know they're looking forward to this game. In most sports, that sandwich game can be a problem. But I did go on to say that they'll need Adrian Peterson to control the clock, check mark. They'll need to avoid turnovers, check mark. And somehow, some way, be one of the first teams we've seen all year long to keep David Carr away from going off. He had 2 straight games of 4 touchdowns or more. They kept them in check to 300 yards and just 2 touchdowns, but those 2 big interceptions by the old man, Terrence Newman, made a big difference. And I am still surprised. Looking back, I still am very impressed and very surprised that the Vikings were able to avoid the pitfall that game provided. And good for them. We talked about it 5 weeks ago here in the Sports Ticket, Kendall. We took a look at the schedule and said it gets really, really hard late in the year. These next 5 games will dictate whether this team has a chance to be a playoff team or doesn't. And we said they need to go 4-1 or 5-0. And we both together thought, God, 4-1, that'd be awesome.
Right.
To be 6-3 going to that Packer game at home. Well, lo and behold, they go 5-0. They're 7-2, and no one saw the Packers losing 3 in a row. And I don't think there's anybody that will admit to it right now that before the game yesterday thought that this edition of the Detroit Lions against this edition of the Green Bay Packers would be the game that ended a streak that dated back to 1991.
91.
4 presidents ago. 4 presidents ago, the last time the Lions went into Wisconsin and won a road game, and they tried their damnedest, and they tried everything to give Green Bay a chance to win that game at the end. They miss an extra point that would have put them up 9. Then they give up the touchdown. Then they give up the onside kick. Then they allow Green Bay to get into borderline field goal range before Mason Crosby shanks the kick and allows the Lions to walk out winners and puts the Vikings in sole possession atop the world that is the division, and that is exciting. And so
Beautiful.
We've got a lot to talk about. As promised on Twitter, we're going to have a special guest joining us on the show today. He is a former tight end from the Minnesota Vikings, Stu Voigt, and Stu is all-knowing when it comes to the ins and outs of the Minnesota Vikings, covers these guys, attends the games, knows these guys inside and out, and so it's going to be fun to talk about a football team right now, Kendall, that can put Green Bay in a huge hole by winning this coming Sunday.
Yep. I really like when Green Bay is in a hole, and it really hasn't happened, ever, that I've been around.
You're too young to remember when they were horrible. So, Stu, are you with us?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Ringing
right now. And it'll be great to talk to him about just that.
Stu, do we got you?
I'm here.
Awesome. Stu, Kendall, Mark, Kevin Gorg, thanks for joining us today. And it's got to be kind of fun and exciting as a Vikings fan and former tight end on that squad to wake up and take a look at the standings and see the Vikings are alone atop the division. How about that?
Well, it was great. They've played, of course, that winning streak they're on. I guess I'd be kidding if I thought that was going to happen. But I knew they're going to have a good team, but they've exceeded my expectations so far, mainly because Adrian Peterson is the Adrian Peterson of old. Teddy Bridgewater, although he's not putting up great numbers, is protecting the football and not making huge mistakes. And we have a rock-solid defense, which, of course, is a cornerstone of a Mike Zimmer coach team. So, yeah, we're doing okay. But toughest part of the schedule is ahead of us right now.
You played for a guy named Bud Grant, who I used to really enjoy watching in this market as a young football fan. And I see a little bit of Bud Grant in Mike Zimmer in that after the game yesterday, he had every right to be jovial, pumped up, emotional, got up to the podium and was asked about being now in control of your own destiny and having first place to yourself. And his comment to me, Stu, was interesting. He said, that's all well and good, but it doesn't matter because it's November right now. All we can do is rack up as many wins as possible, and we'll add them up at the end of the year. And I thought that was refreshing that a coach wasn't going to celebrate anything and kept his team kind of focused on the big prize at the end of the year.
Well, I think that is kind of what I remember with Bud Grant. Don't get too high with the victories or too low with the defeats. And the season, it's not a sprint. It's kind of like a marathon. You've got to get through the whole 16-game schedule, and then you've got a playoff to look forward to. But right now, the course has been charted pretty good. I think the foundation is laid, and more importantly, the players are all buying into the Zimmer system, and I think right now it's been pretty smooth. But again, as we've seen with the Packers who are coming to town, they started off undefeated, I think, in the first 6 games, then have lost the last 3, and all indications are in a little bit of disarray in Green Bay. Of course, they're coming in this weekend to TCF Stadium, but things can change on a drop of a hat. Although we've had injuries, nothing. We've had people to step up and play while the other guys are healing up. So we've enjoyed pretty smooth sailing so far.
And, talking about the rest of the schedule, do you have a specific team you think our biggest challenge is going to be?
Well, I watched the game last night, Arizona and Seattle. Those are 2 teams we play. Arizona out in Phoenix and Seattle here. Those are 2 football teams that I have a lot of respect for. Atlanta down there is going to be tough. And, of course, 2 games with the Packers, who are arch rivals. You can kind of throw out the record book, and as long as Green Bay has Aaron Rodgers, I know they're going through some hard times, not able to run the football and not putting a lot of points on the board. But, my gosh, Aaron Rodgers, I think, threw 61 passes yesterday against Detroit. So they find a way. And, I mean, the word out of Green Bay is not to panic, to relax. Talked to my buddy Larry McCarron, who broadcasts the game, and he says, they probably weren't as good as they were touted during the first 6 games that they won, and they're not as bad as they've looked in the last 3 games. And, of course, 2 of those were against pretty good football teams in Carolina and Denver. So we'll see. It's I think one of the great rivalries is the Packers and the Vikings coming up this Sunday.
Yeah, and Stu, it certainly is for all the fans when you talk about all these border battles. But put us back in the locker room when you played and you guys got to lace them up against your rivals from Green Bay. What made that matchup special from a player's perspective?
Well, of course, from my perspective, being from Wisconsin, from Madison, Wisconsin, growing up throughout the 60s with Vince Lombardi coach Green Bay Packers, I can still tell you everybody on both starting lineups and even the backups, and that's what you did. You went to church, got home, and listened and watched Ray Scott and Tony Canadeo do the Green Bay Packers. So they're one of the great teams in professional football, the great history. But once I came up to Minnesota, then it was trying to maybe show the folks back home that Stu Voigt was a member of a team that was going to handle the Green Bay Packers. And throughout my career, we've had great success against the Packers. So it's kind of gone both ways. The Vikings had their way throughout the 70s, and then I went to the Packers, back to the Vikings with the Randy Moss, Chris Carter era and that high-flying offense. But now in the last few years, it's been all Green Bay, and I think it's time we took back the bragging rights.
I agree. I think it's time to take back the bragging rights. KG and I were talking about this. I'm pretty young, so I don't really remember a time when the Vikings were significantly better than the Packers. So I'm really excited for this weekend's game. Do you kind of have an over-under? What do you think the final score is going to be?
Well, neither team has been putting a lot of points on the board lately, so you'd want to think you go the under, and it's going to be one of those tight games that even yesterday, it comes down to, both kickers. Blair Walsh has his ups and downs. Looks like he's back on schedule and missed a couple yesterday. And Mason Crosby, the kicker of the Packers, had a chance to win the game. And although it was a pretty tough kick, 52 yards, he kind of shanked it. So I got a feeling it's going to be coming down. It's to who kicks the final field goal, maybe even in overtime. The Vikings certainly have had their luck go their way in overtime games that Walsh has won for the team. But it's going to be hard fought. The Packers are always, they're a playoff type team, and maybe they took their eye off the ball yesterday against Detroit. It's kind of hard to explain, but I got a feeling they realize that they can't afford to get 2 games behind the Vikings in the division. So I think it's going to be an all-out effort by both teams, and I think we'll be the favorite, but maybe not by the gamblers. But I put ourselves a favorite, maybe of 3 points. But of course that could go out the window. If you told me who's going to turn the football over, who's going to make the big mistakes or the great plays, I could probably predict the winner. But we got to stay tuned and watch that on Sunday.
Familiar voice of Stu Voigt, former Vikings tight end, our analyst here on Vikings football throughout the season on the Sports Ticket. And Stu, you're spot on. The Vegas books opened the game up late yesterday at Green Bay -1. The Sharpies, or the early gamblers, made the Vikings a 2-point favorite as of today. And the over-under 45, so they're expecting some points, even though it's going to be 37 degrees and a little chilly here in the Twin Cities for a little outdoor football. Vikings are 1-9-1 in their last 11 against Green Bay. And I guess for me, Stu, the question mark that I'm going to have is when a team's had your number as long as Green Bay has had the Vikings' number. I know they played them tough last year here in the Twin Cities, but they still came up on the short end. How do you get over that? How do you get over the hump when a team's kind of had your number for a while?
Well, you just can control what you can control, and I think there's no question this coaching staff with head coach Zimmer and Norv Turner and the staff very confident they're going to be very well prepared. And then I think you try to communicate that to your team. Here's how you beat the Packers. And I think the Vikings formula this year has been we're going to have a strong defense. I don't think they've heard some numbers where they don't give up more than 22, 23 points a game this year, and they've had some great games. They're gonna hold you in there, and then just do what you can on offense. Take what the defense will give you. We're not so far a team that has been, other than Adrian Peterson, we've been a little bit sputtery on offense. Thank goodness we've got a couple of receivers have come. Diggs has come along a long way, and I think if we get to 28 points, we can win the game, but that's the big if. And special teams, who knows? I mean, who would have thought that kickoff return by Patterson was going to happen after it's kind of a squib kick, he fumbled it, but how many times do you see that where the coverage team kind of relaxes and he gets to the sidelines and he's off to the races? That was the difference yesterday, I thought, when he put the touchdown on the board there. Otherwise, you kind of thought that Oakland was going to stay in the game, but we're finding a way to things to happen in our direction at the end of the game, and that's something that didn't happen last year that's happening this year. We're winning the tight games as opposed to losing them last year.
Mm-hmm. And CP, it was really fun to see him kind of doing his thing after a little bit of a lackluster start to the year. But is there a specific player that you've been really impressed with this season on the Vikings?
Well, I would say Adrian Peterson, and that's not I don't think I'm making a real bold statement. He's just a great football player, and he's they analyze him, and he's been almost paralysis by analysis. How many times he's maybe looking for the long run and gets caught for a loss, but he's a man in that backfield. He's running downhill, and before he made that 80-yard run yesterday, he had 120 hard-earned yards, and took the pressure off the passing attack where you really don't have to have these 3rd and 8, 3rd and 12 situations. So he's been great. I mean, he's been everything. 30 years old. I mean, the naysayers, I think, have had to put that argument to rest because he's been the cornerstone of that offense. Teddy Bridgewater's, I think, a good young quarterback. I wouldn't say great yet, but he's managing the game. They're putting him in positions and situations where he can be successful. And then the receivers, we spread the ball out to everybody. I mean, 3 tight ends, 4 or 5 receivers coming out of the backfield. Even Peterson's catching the ball out of the backfield, which is something Viking fans wanted to have for years and years, where he was kind of one-dimensional. Now at least he'll catch the ball out of the backfield and gives him a chance to work in space. So hats off to Norv Turner. He's getting a lot out of an offense which really still has I think the shakiest part is still the offensive line. Still a little bit too much pressure on Bridgewater, and he kind of has a little bit. He's not a runner, but he has enough foot speed and elusiveness to get out of the way of some of this rush. But I got a feeling, that rush is going to be around, and hopefully, we've lost a bunch of guys to the offensive line. The other guys, especially the left tackle and the right tackle, are hanging in there, but they've had their moments where they looked to be a little suspect.
And one thing I've noticed too on the other side of the ball, because it is going to come down to in big games like this, especially games where the point spread's 1 or 2 points, the superstars have to rise up. So you look at Adrian Peterson, who's the best we have to offer on our side of the ledger. They've got Aaron Rodgers, who will be a Hall of Famer someday. He might be the best, if not maybe one of the best 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the football right now. But lately there's been a template for success defensively against Green Bay. And I watched a breakdown on TV this morning about how the Lions were able to kind of copycat what the last couple of opponents had done against Rodgers, starting in Denver, moving to Carolina, and then the Lions yesterday. And that was to kind of make sure that Rodgers has to stay in the pocket. They've kind of decided that when he roams the pocket left or right, he's extra dangerous, buying some time for his receivers. And so they're rushing the passer in a situation where it almost creates a bubble. And they're not even worried if they get to him or not, but they don't want him to get out of the pocket. And then they're pressing those receivers to the middle of the field, not letting those receivers get to the sideline. And they had a couple of really unique looks at that yesterday with Detroit at Lambeau Field, really kind of suffocating that offense. How much do you think the Vikings look at that, and are they equipped with the skill set that they offer to do the same thing this coming Sunday?
Well, I think they are. I think, this is a copycat league. So if somebody's successful in defensing Aaron Rodgers, the next team up is going to try that same thing. But, even yesterday, he threw the ball 61 times for 300 and some yards, and he certainly isn't the problem. They've lost, when they lost Jordy Nelson, they lost their big receiver, and that hurt. I think the biggest problem with the Packers is they can't run the football. They went with a Lacey, who was going to be, I thought, a good running back, and now he's fallen off. I think he lost his a starting role, although they kind of interchanged the running backs to a guy named Starks, who's just a journeyman. And, I think they rushed for maybe 40, 45 yards yesterday. Well, that's not the balance you need. You can do all the draws and screens, but you want to, but you've got to mix in some kind of running attack to keep the defense somewhat honest. Now, as a result, if you can control the line of scrimmage and the running attack with your 4 down linemen and a middle linebacker, boy, that leaves a bunch of other guys to cover in space and gives you a lot more pass defense. That's the big if. If they can't run the ball, the Packers, they have to rely on Rodgers. You're right. To keep him in that bubble and make him throw the ball and make him throw short, and you've got something going. But, the Packers really suffered a big loss. This Jordy Nelson was a home run guy they wanted to have all year long, and losing him was a big battle. So we'll see. They still got the firepower, and they're still the champions until we dethrone them this year of the division. So I'm not sure that's not going to be a great game to watch, because both teams, they realize one of the two teams, although I'll hand it to the Bears. The Bears actually played real well yesterday, and looks like a team that's coming on. So the division looked a little weak other than the Packers at the start. All of a sudden, it's got a little bit tougher.
Mm-hmm. And, you just brought up the Bears game. I watched a little bit of that yesterday, too. And Zach Miller had a massive, massive game. Is there any tight ends really in the league that have stood out to you this season? Because, you get the usuals, you get the Gronk, you get stuff like that. But I was really impressed by him. What are your thoughts on some other tight ends that are around right now?
Well, I agree with you 100%. I think he's done a great job. And I think, let's start with the Vikings. I think Rudolph obviously had the drop, which is probably going to make every low-light film there is, and he's a good player. But I think the two other tight ends, especially this kid Pruitt, I think is going to be a very nice player for the Vikings. So a lot of teams, they need 3 tight ends. It used to be had the big guy to block, and then a ex-basketball player to catch passes, and another guy to be a special teamer and get in there. But you see a lot of 3 tight end looks, and obviously by far the best tight end in the league is Gronkowski. My gosh, he's a man-child. He's like 6'6", 6'7", and can block and catch the ball, and they use him a lot of, his first option for Tom Brady. But it's these tight ends, a lot of the hybrids, I think are, even Antonio Gates is still playing pretty good with San Diego. So that's the quarterback's best friend, because usually not the first option, but you have a big target who's 6'5", 6'6", going against a 5'11" defensive back. You've got a mismatch that the good quarterbacks can take well advantage of that, and I learned that from Fran Tarkenton. I was kind of not his first option, probably not his second option, sometimes not even the third option, but if I hung around long enough, I'd get myself open, and he'd get me the football. So the tight end's still integral part of anybody's offense.
All right, Stu, we're going to close with this. I know it's still 5 or 6 days away, but let's get your final prediction. Who wins, and what's the score going to be this coming Sunday? Vikings v. Packers.
Well, I think it's going to come down to a field goal at the end. I'm going to say the Vikings are going to kick a field goal and win 27-24. I mean, that's going to be a low-scoring game. Not sure what the weather, and that could impact things, but we're on a roll right now. And even if we get by the Packers, I think the schedule is going to be tough. But now I'm an optimist enough to think that we want to now not just we talked about, I think at the start of the year being maybe a wild card. Now I'm talking about winning the division, and then dare we say maybe even getting a home field for a playoff game. So that would be nice, and I think we have the talent and the coaching to do that.
I'm with you all the way, Stu, and I really appreciate your thoughts on the Vikings, and I hope your prediction plays out just the way you said it. It'd be a ton of fun to watch those guys win a game, especially against their arch rivals, and do it in dramatic fashion.
It's been a fun year so far. Let's keep it up.
All right, I'll call you offline the next week or so to try to track down some wild tickets for the Thanksgiving holiday. And
beautiful. There's another one of my favorite teams. Good, thanks.
They're doing great, and we really appreciate your help here on the Sports Ticket. Thank you, Stu.
Sounds great. Take care.
Stu Voigt, Vikings legendary tight end, and I don't think Stu ever dropped a pass that Kyle Rudolph dropped. And thank goodness it didn't matter, because Rudolph could not be more of a stand-up guy and more of just a down-to-earth quality human that you pull for. But my God, how did he drop that pass? I mean, there was nobody around, and I happened to be listening to the game at that time on the fan, and Pete Bursich does a wonderful job as the Vikings analyst, and he said there was no wind involved, there was no sun involved. That's one that you just have to say, you know what?
You dropped it.
You'll laugh about it someday if it didn't matter, and it didn't. The Vikings went on to win, and they'll play this Sunday, 3:25. They flexed the game back to be the America's Game bit. Middle of the afternoon. It's going to be spectacular fun. Aaron, you're going to be in attendance. That's going to be cool. Our producer will be there live taking all the sights and sounds, and we'll get some thoughts on that next Monday when we wrap up what should be a classic matchup where the Vikings finally put some distance between them and the Packers with that schedule getting tough on the back end as we've talked about. It's exciting. It's fun to talk about this team right now, and we'll see if they can keep it going on Sunday. We'll have more of a fantasy-style breakdown of that game, and there's a lot of different angles to take. Vikings-Packers this weekend on our Thursday show. Thursday we come to you, I believe, at 5 o'clock here in the cornfields. And I'll be out in Boston covering the Wild and the Bruins, and we'll have all kinds of great fantasy football steam and our official predictions, which I hope to atone for after Kendall kicked my booty last week with her Vikings win prediction. Now we're going to talk about moral victories and Gopher football, because on my drive in today, I was thinking about the season that's quickly getting away from us as Gopher football fans. After going to the bowl game last year, posting 8 wins, playing on New Year's Day, which is something I had never seen as a Gopher football fan, and I'm damn near 50 years old. This year, they've played an extraordinarily difficult schedule, and with 2 games left, both at home, they're going to be favored in one this week, Saturday against Illinois. They're favored by 7.5. Then they're going to be a dog closing out the year against another Wisconsin team that's had our number, the Wisconsin Badgers. Kendall, do you realize, though, that even though the Gophers are 4-5 in the standings, they have as many moral victories as they have real victories? And moral victories count in Vegas, because all 4 of these moral victories, if you were in Las Vegas and you bet your favorite college team, the Gophers got the money. They lost to TCU as a 17.5-point dog. They lost by a touchdown to open up the season at home. Then as the season progressed, more moral victories. In fact, we're coming off 3 straight moral victories. Home to Michigan. Everybody, Halloween, Michigan's a double-digit favorite. And, yeah, we screwed up with the clock management, and there were some issues with the quarterback sneak. And the Gophers did lose the game on the scoreboard, but that's moral victory number 2. Then the biggest moral victory, in my opinion, at Ohio State. 24-point underdogs, down 21-0. They rally, only to lose in the end by a couple of touchdowns. And then moral victory number 4 this weekend at Iowa. And I got to tell you, If you had told me the Gophers were going to score 35 points,
Right?
I would have driven down to Kinnick Stadium myself and grabbed that frickin' pig and drove it back to my house in Minnetonka. There's no way you lose that game scoring 35 points. But again, as a big underdog, double-digit underdog of 10 points, they go down 40-35 to Iowa. And no longer are we hearing complaints about Mitch Leidner and the offense. No longer are people complaining about the offense. Now this rock star defense that was going to carry us all year long, well, now with some injuries, but they can't stop the run, and they can't stop the pass, and they can't get us a turnover. Offense is just fine right now, Miss Kendall.
Yep.
But we gave up 40 to Iowa, and that's a problem.
I know, right? Well, before we got on, I was talking to Aaron downstairs, and I was like, dude, I genuinely don't remember the last time the Gophers even scored 35 points, like you said. So I think it was impressive on the offensive side of the ball to see that every time Iowa went in and drove in and got a touchdown, Leidner would come back and he took care of the football. How many third down conversions? I mean, the percentage was higher than I think
They were
I don't remember what it
terrific
was,
on
but
offense.
It was like there was nothing about it. But I think what?
He put you in a box. They
you
scored
told-
41 against Purdue is what he's saying.
Okay, thanks. I'm like, hey, what? What is this
I've been
note?
traveling.
What is this note? Thanks,
I love
Aaron.
it.
I really appreciate
I
it.
love it.
Anyway, as I was saying, it was so important what I was saying. I can't even remember. Oh, Leidner, KJ May. I've been waiting, maybe I was traveling when one of these things happened, Aaron.
Be nice.
But I haven't really seen a ton of connections with those two. And I feel like this was a really good game for that. Obviously, really crappy, poor tackling. Our defense just couldn't stop, what's his name, CJ, what's his nuts? the
LaShawn
quarterback.
Daniels and CJ Beathard, the quarterback, who
Yeah, that
ran
guy.
and threw all over us.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing about it, I mean, we have to beat Illinois and Wisconsin. However, Wisconsin's game against Iowa was super low scoring. It was like 6-10 or something. I don't know if that says anything about our offense.
We're peaking right now offensively.
Right.
But I think that as I break down what happened over the weekend, and I got to tell you, I mean, I can't get mad at these guys because I do know they're playing teams that have superior talent. I mean, you look at these last three games, and Michigan, Ohio State, and Iowa are better football teams than Minnesota, period. There's no argument. They've got more talent. So the fact that they're in these games to the final minutes, I mean, every single game down to the wire, and on the road at Ohio State and at Iowa, both teams undefeated, both teams legitimately in the mix for a national championship. They're not that far away, and that's a good thing. Now, we asked earlier if this changing of the guard with Jerry Kill and his health issues, which is really a shame, and Tracy Clay's taking over, will affect recruiting. If it doesn't, and if they can keep getting that next tier of player that will work for you and will grow with the program and be rock solid, they're close. They really are. The area they've got to figure out, and they've been really good on defense, and they've got some key injuries, but the third down defense killed them at Kinnick Stadium on Saturday. Iowa had 15 third downs, and they garnered a first down 10 of 15. You cannot give up 67% on third down, and many of those third downs were third and longs. And the 195 yards rushing is tough to stomach, and it was like at every turn when it looked like Minnesota was going to try to kind of wiggle their way back in the game, Iowa would pick up a huge third down. They'd get momentum, and the next thing you knew, the band was playing. They were in the end zone. The celebration was on. And the Gophers, to their credit, never went away. And I'm a little worried this weekend that after three straight emotional games against ranked teams, with Wisconsin on deck, and I'm going to play the card again. And this is a coach's Lamont. This is you got to know that if you've coached at any position at any time, you worry about these games that are called sandwich games.
Right.
And Wes Walls and I talk about this all the time at the rink. And Wes says, when he's coaching, he always tries to make sure, and he remembers as a player with the Wild, these trap games happen. Three straight emotional games against ranked teams. Wisconsin on deck for the Axe. Here comes Illinois. You're favored. It's an 11 a.m. game. You've been getting just the snot beat out of you emotionally in these games, and now you've got not a cupcake, but you've got a team that you should beat. Now, the one thing that Tracy Claeys has going for him when he laments to his team is Illinois beat these guys last year. So there is some revenge involved from a Gopher perspective, but I think it's going to be a really, really hard game to get up for. I think this is the kind of game where I could easily see Minnesota getting off to a super slow start and having to win from behind. And you want to keep the hope of making a bowl there. And I know that the bowls are watered down and New Year's Day bowl games are screwed up now. The whole thing is a mess for college football fans, but for recruiting, it matters. And I think for a new coaching staff that's still an old coaching staff, but now in different positions because Jerry Kill had to retire early, this is important for these guys. And so if you can win this game on Saturday, I don't care if you win by 1 or win by 20, just win the game. Make that Wisconsin game relevant where it's more than just the game for the Axe. Make that game winning you're in for a bowl. That'd be a huge accomplishment for this team after what they've been through. They've been through an awful lot this year. Mitch Leidner is going to walk out of the season a much better quarterback than when he entered it.
Right.
And he lost some significant personnel with Max Williams, who scored his first NFL touchdown yesterday for Baltimore, and David Cobb, who I think will get a start here in the next couple of weeks as a running back for Tennessee. You lost two really big pieces on offense, and there were struggles early for Mitch and the gang. But to his credit, with all the negativity in town, he stuck with it, and like I said, he'll be a better quarterback for having gone through it. So this game to me is super important, and I just hope that, Kendall, they can find a way to maybe just, for once, just play their game and bury a team they should bury, because they're a much better team than Illinois.
I think they're a better team than Illinois too. It really does just suck, for lack of a better way to put it. Really, like when you get so excited. Yesterday, on Saturday, I was texting back and forth with my dad, and I'm like, "You watching this?" Because we talked about I was gonna be gone. I got home just in time to watch the game, and it was so fun, and then it was so upsetting, and I felt like Nebraska and how they'd kind of started their season the same way, just all these upsetting games. And when is it going to be time, though, for the Gophers to really just break through? And we don't have to have these kind of conversations. When we're one of the teams like Northwestern right now, all of a sudden they're this big ranked team. They looked like a team that was nothing for the last how long? I don't remember.
Well, their coach is pretty good. They've had some pockets of success here with this
pockets.
guy. Well, I'm not kidding. They've been to a couple major bowls in the last 4 years. I mean, they weren't supposed to be rock solid, but remember, they got off to a great start. They beat a ranked team first week of the year. They beat Stanford, who hadn't lost again until this weekend. You want to get to where Wisconsin is, though, and that's the frustration that most Gopher football fans have. Is
there's no legacy.
They win everywhere else. They win in Iowa. They win in Wisconsin, and all we're told for years and years and years is you're playing in the Dome. You're not on campus. If you get a stadium on campus and that student vibe, that the tailgating and all that tradition that you can build, then you'll be there. Because you wonder with all this university has to offer, and there is still great tradition at the University of Minnesota. You have to go back a long time to the 60s, but this team was in the Rose Bowl. I know it's hard for people our age to even remember that or to think about it. And then you think about the great school that the University of Minnesota is. You think about the very, very diverse and unique opportunity to go to school in a huge city. And it's a decent-sized market, the Twin Cities. It's a much bigger market than what Iowa City or Kinnick Stadium or Madison, or you pick your school around here. I mean, other than Northwestern, who's just outside of Chicago, it's a really great setup here. And so there's no reason they can't get there, but it's like the chicken and the egg. You got to kind of start winning on a consistent basis. Put yourself on national TV on a consistent basis, and then put yourself in bowl games. And they just have always been a program that's taken 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And just when you think they're going to turn the corner, like last year, here we are again, sweating out, can we make the Motor City Kiddie Bowl, on December 19th in front of, a half-full stadium. It doesn't matter, but, it does. And, you want to see a team build off what they did last year when they were 8 wins, when they're on New Year's Day, playing a really good Missouri team. And they go back and, you graduate some good players, but now you're scratching and clawing just to be relevant again. And that's why if you could have won just one of these last 3 games, that you were in all the way. The Michigan game, clearly the most winnable of the 3. Just win one of those games. Now you're playing Saturday to be bowl eligible. Now you've got a whole different look at an Illinois game that looks like an eyesore on the schedule right now, in between all these great games, and then Wisconsin at the end, which is always so special for all these kids up here. So, yeah, it's going to be a tough season to look back and say there were a lot of successes. But I'm going to say, when you take a look at the schedule they played and the way they played TCU, Michigan, Ohio State, and Iowa, that you can see that there's a decent enough foundation there where this team can be good in the coming years if Tracy Claeys and his coaching staff can be the same or better when it comes to recruiting that Jerry Kill and his staff was.
Yeah, I think that is just the nail in the head right there. Is we haven't had huge success because we haven't had pretty recently, we just really haven't had any coaches there for a long time. And that's, you look at these big programs that do so well, that's because their coach has been there forever and ever and ever and has built this thing up. And I mean, he's got, what was it, 3 years? A 3-year contract?
3-year contract. I don't know. I mean, Jerry Kill was a super recruiter, man. I mean, that guy, you could just see from his press conferences, he's the kind of guy that did well in the living room.
Right.
And sat down with mom and dad and talked about the character. Now, this is his entire staff still there other than him. But it still comes down to the head guy when it comes down to recruiting. That phone call or that moment in time where you get the kid with his family, and they're going to likely use that as that moment where they decide if they're going to come your way or head to the bigger schools with the bigger traditions. And it's tough, and it's an uphill battle. And so I hope they can get it done. On the field, I can't fault with the way they're playing. They're playing terrific football. We'll have a more specific preview of that Gopher game against Illinois on our Thursday show.
Yes, we will. And if you're ever listening to the Live and Social Network, check out the show right before ours on Mondays at 2:30 to around 3:30-ish with those guys. You never really know. But that's Apples to Apples. If you are one of our season ticket holders, you've heard Scott Applebaum before. He's come on the show a few times. He's hilarious. It's just another perspective, father-son perspective on sports. They chat about other things. Just today, I can't remember. I don't even know what they were talking about, but the conversation was pretty hilarious when I caught a little earful of it sitting downstairs. So check them out. Apples to Apples, Mondays at 2:30. Otherwise, the Your Geek Show. It's a show that just embraces your geekiness. It's on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Or, as always, you can pick it up, livensocial.com. Find it there, just like you will. Our show.
Brilliant stuff.
Brilliant. I'm so poetic.
You're really good. You're really good at teeing that stuff up. 2 quickies to close. We'll be done here in the next 15 or 20 minutes. If you're listening here as a season ticket holder, we want to thank you for being a part of this every Monday and Thursday. We love tweets coming in at MS Kendall Mark, at FSN Gorg, and I'll get to a couple Twitter questions here momentarily, but we're going to have a wild segment, and we're going to have a little fantasy football waiver wire gem segment. And the next question I get comes from one of our season ticket holders, whose name is Jeff Madej. He's a regular listener and the media mogul that runs the press box out of Canterbury Park. And Jeff tweeted at me this morning asking for an update on the health of Zach Parise. And what we can tell you is this: the Wild are in the middle of a 4-game road trip. I'll be meeting them in Boston on Wednesday. The game tomorrow on Tuesday is on NBC Sports Network. Zach is back on the ice. He is not going to be playing on this road trip. But there's no timetable set up. But clearly, if he's back in skates and able to skate, that I would guess sometime in the next 8 to 10 days, we might get a chance to see him back at practice. And so you're probably looking at somewhere around 2 weeks on the top end for game time for Zach Parise if all things go well. And again, it's a day-by-day process when you're trying to come back from something like this. And Zach, knowing him the way I do, it's probably killing him not to be out there right now. And I guess the question is, Kendall, is the Wild are playing in the toughest division in hockey. And then speaking of first place, they just got done matching up with the first place Dallas Stars over the weekend. And 4-game road trip, you're going to try to split it and get 4 points. They've already got 3 of possible 4 with an overtime win at Carolina last Thursday, then the overtime loss at Dallas. I liked the game on Saturday. I didn't love some things about the game, but I think that you can see that Dallas has a ton of weapons. They get up and down the rink. They're a well-coached team. They're a deep team. And they're in my opinion right now, one of the teams to beat in the Western Conference. So the fact that you lost in overtime without your best player is a good thing. The one area that needs to be addressed right now is the power play. It got off to a great start this year. And everybody remembers last year when they got off to just a horrific start. I think 2 for their first 40. They really never recovered. This year, just the opposite. They were up clicking around 25% in that first couple weeks of the season. And they've hit a little bit of a skid now. And it's really not surprising when you take Zach Parise off that top power play. That's a significant loss. Marco Scandella returned on Saturday, but he had missed some time, and he had taken Zach's spot on the half wall there on the right side of the rink. And so they've got to figure this thing out. And I think if your power play is clicking, you win that game on Saturday, because Dallas was able to score a power play goal, and the goal happened just as the penalty was expiring, one of them, and then they got one later on the power play. But the Wild didn't, and that was, in an overtime game, those little things inside the game make a difference. And so you're playing Pittsburgh and Boston this week on the road, likely going to be tight games. The Wild always seem to be in these one-goal games. The power play is something you need to focus in on and watch and see if they can't get over the hump. And I think that the player right now that can maybe push them over the hump is a guy like Ryan Suter, who's still on that power play, and he's quarterbacking the back end of that power play. And his decision-making with the puck probably changes now that Zach's not to his right when he's at the top of that power play right near the blue line. Can they work the puck through Ryan Suter and maybe get somebody like a Jason Zucker down low or a Nino Niederreiter down low, somebody off the half wall that can make a play and, just break the – I think it's 0 for their last 13 right now. So you're talking about a stretch of 4 or 5 games where that power play's come up dry, and sooner or later, like on Saturday, that's going to make the difference in the game. And that's going to be something they've got to figure out here. Mm-hmm. But so far, so good on the road trip.
Yeah, so far so good. It was great having Scandella back against Stars. I mean, that was huge. But the power play is one thing too. It's really concerning, I think, to me as just a Wild fan who you come from a huge hockey background and I don't. And this whole change of the rules last year, I was just really worried about because I didn't think we'd do really well 3-on-3, and we haven't. What are we, 1-3?
1-3. Yep.
Where do we have to? Where can we improve? I guess.
Well, I think I don't mind 3-on-3 at any level for the Wild because they've got team speed, and I think the one area watching that they've got to kind of adhere to, and it's a puck possession game. They've got to get more in the mindset of what the Russians did in the early 80s. And even though, the U.S. beat them in that unbelievable 1980 Olympics at Lake Placid in the semifinals to eventually go on and win that improbable gold medal, sometimes you got to go back before you go forward. And I think watching the game on Saturday, they were so, I think, aggressive at getting the puck and driving towards Dallas that a lot of times teams can read that and put you in a bad situation. Anytime you've got the puck in overtime, you don't need to rush. Mm-hmm. It can take as much time as you want because in the ideal situation, what I love about 3-on-3 is it's the long change. And so the long change means that if the team you're skating against is chasing you around as you make good passes and maybe you don't even get a shot to the net, the longer you stay out there, the more tired they're going to get, and they know they've got to get to the far end of the rink to make a change. If you can control the puck in their zone, you can wear them down. And so many times when the Wild got the puck on Saturday, they were so apt at just going north right away when sometimes you got to go back, circle the wagons, get some fresh troops, and then attack. And don't make a play towards the defender or towards the net until you've got a situation where you can outnumber them and have open space. And I just don't like when pucks are 50-50 pucks in that situation when you've got control of the situation. It's supposed to be long possessions, and the team you're playing is supposed to have to really work hard to get the puck back or retrieve it after a big golden scoring opportunity where the goalie makes a save or misses the net. And they didn't even get those scoring chances on Saturday because they were just a little bit impatient to me in that spot. But as far as the roster goes, I love 3-on-3 hockey for this team. Think of the speed this team possesses, not just the obvious choices, which when Zach's healthy, great skater. Jason Zucker, phenomenal. Niederreiter, for his size, is a really good skater. When Fontaine comes back, he's fast. Jordan Schrader's fast. Eric Haula is super fast. I haven't touched the back end yet, where you've 5 of your 6 defensemen. Take out Prosser or Fulham, they're not going to play 3-on-3 under any circumstances. But those other 5 guys, from Spurgeon to Brodin to Suter, take your pick, Dumba, all these kids can skate. Marco. And so the Wild actually should be good in 3-on-3. So there's going to be an adjustment there. Mike Yo's concerned. We asked him about it after the game on Saturday, and he's disappointed with some of the execution. Some of the things I just mentioned, I'm sure they've seen when they've watched back some clips. And you may see another overtime game this week. Maybe both these games go to overtime. Pittsburgh and Boston are both going to be good matches for the Wild, good, even, tight games. And so they've got to make some adjustments. They'll be fine. I like that Devin Dubnyk is kind of back on top of his game right now. He was hit or miss start of the year. But, as we sit here now, middle of November, he's tied with Henrik Lundqvist for the most wins in the league with 10. He's found his game. He's making big saves at big times in games. He looks like the guy we saw last year when he kind of was the catalyst to this team kind of making that big rally second half of the year to make the playoffs. So, no, if Dubnyk's going to play the way he's been playing lately and we get Zach Parise back, I think those numbers in overtime, honestly, will even themselves out. But, we'll talk a little more Wild on Thursday, Kendall. We'll be more specific because we'll have the Pittsburgh game in the rear mirror. We'll be in Boston. We'll have a feel for what the Wild are going through and maybe who's there, who's not there, and what to expect against the Bruins on Thursday night. But before we finish up on the sports ticket, it's always going to be fantasy football on the show all the way through your playoffs. And we're going to, on Thursdays, we're going to give you the 5 players you want to drop, the 5 players you want to key in on. And yes, I'm going to pat myself on the back right here because Kirk Cousins was the number one player I said you needed to pick up in fantasy football. And thank you. Thank you for New Orleans. Thank you for your pass defense, for letting him. I mean, he could have had 6 or 7, but he got us 4, and then they pulled the starters out because they were up 47-14. But Kirk Cousins and the Redskins, well done. I parlayed that with my tight end in both my big leagues, Jordan Reed. So I had 2 connections to Jordan Reed. It was very exciting. We talked about the tight end, Kyle Rudolph, getting a touchdown. In my mind, he did. I mean, that was just dropped. And I don't think he'll drop one like that again. Oakland's still a team. If you've got tight ends or you want to stream a tight end or pick up a sneaky tight end, as we've said all year long, watch Oakland's defense. They are very susceptible to that position. The one that I think fooled me more than any other player in fantasy last week was one of the players I said that you needed to bench, and that was Jay Cutler. And
He did pretty well.
I'll preface it by saying this. Now, one of the plays that I think added to his pass numbers was an 83-yard dump-off pass to Jeremy Langford, who went the distance. And I don't know where the St. Louis defense went, but since I've got Langford on one of my teams, I was thrilled. But Cutler played really well. You talked about a couple of tight ends to Miller for scores. St. Louis looked like a team that just had left it all on the field here in the Twin Cities last week, and they didn't have any answer for Chicago. I didn't see that coming, especially in that dome. I thought Chicago would struggle, but to their credit and to Jay Cutler's credit, they surprised us. So there were some good, some bad with the 5 to bank on and the 5 to bench, but for the most part, the trend is playing out. There are certain trends now as we approach Week 11 that you have got to pay attention to. Sadly, New Orleans is on bye, and they fired their defensive coordinator, so we'll have to wait a week to see where they're at. But if you've got a quarterback or can get a quarterback that's facing New Orleans, that's a good thing. Tight end against Oakland, no-brainer. And then for the most part, if Pittsburgh has Ben Roethlisberger, you want Antonio Brown. So I'm not going to give myself a strike for saying bench Antonio Brown because Cleveland did the one thing they couldn't do. If you're Cleveland going into that game, do not let Landry Jones leave the game.
Right.
Keep him upright. You've got Ben Roethlisberger on the sidelines warming up. Why would you knock him out of the game? You just killed your chances to win.
You're an idiot.
But no, I mean, they were just doing their job. It didn't work out. Roethlisberger came in and lit them up. Antonio Brown could not be stopped. How's your fantasy team doing?
It's pretty good. You know, I shouldn't have done something. I did bench Fitzy, and he scored 23 points. But
did he
okay.
score, though? He didn't score.
Well, he didn't score, but he got 23 points.
And I didn't see that coming
130
either.
yards.
I benched Carson Palmer to play Kirk Cousins. And
right.
had I known that Arizona was going to put up 365 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, I would have had to go get Kirk Cousins. I mean, that was amazing. I never saw that game being high scoring. 39-32 might have been that was the lowest over-under total in Las Vegas last week. So I can't blame you for benching Fitzgerald. Never saw that coming.
Benched him. Cooper wasn't great. I thought he'd do a little bit better in their own building. But Starks, Murray, they were pretty good. I've never this year had a great running back because things just didn't go well for me with Arian Foster and with DeMarco Murray. Enough said. My go-to, Brandon Marshall, he only got me 11 points, which was painful. But the biggest disappointment to me was I had been thinking about picking up Zach Miller for a while because not this week, but the week before, he had a pretty good game too. And I was like, who is this kid?
Right.
But Bennett blew up. So I just didn't really think anything of it. They used Martellus Bennett strictly as a blocker this last game. He was
a non-factor in the passing
jack
game.
Squat. He got me 4 points, and I should have listened to my gut because now everyone in my league isn't going to know who Miller is, but if I'm low on the waiver wire, they're going to pick him up anyways.
Somebody will sneak him by you.
Right, because he got like 27 points or something. Anyway, today I've got Dalton and I've got Nate Washington are playing. We'll see. The girl who I'm playing is at 109 points, and she's done. I'm at 75 points. I think if Andy Dalton does his normal thing, he usually gets about 28. I could be fine.
You need Nate Washington to score, and you'll be fine. Because Dalton's going to get his tonight. They're a 12-point favorite. They're going to win that game.
Right.
I'm going to give you a couple of gems here at the end of the show for the waiver wire, and we're going to try to jump the gun because tomorrow everybody's going to be on the waiver wire. Hopefully you can sneak this in and beat him to the punch. A lot of leagues, though, it comes down to your record, so you may be stuck. But there are some players to keep an eye on, and I'm going to start with one that's going to be pertinent for your lineup.
Okay.
Matt Jones is a running back for Washington. He's off the radar, and he's more of a pass-catching back. I think he had 109 yards receiving yesterday and a touchdown. If you're looking for a running back and you're kind of in that weird spot, like you said, where DeMarco Murray's been up or down, Starks, we don't know what Green Bay is going to give you against the Vikings defense. Matt Jones, running back, Washington, certainly one to lock in on. The obvious one this week, if you're down a receiver, and there are some good teams on bye, and you've got to pay attention here this time of year to the bye weeks, but you've got teams like Pittsburgh, the Giants, New Orleans, and Cleveland. And 3 of those 4 teams have big-time receivers. I'm talking Odell Beckham Jr., I'm talking Antonio Brown, I'm talking go-to guys that you're going to be missing. Pick up Danny Amendola. And I know he'll be popular, and if you have a bad record, you're going to get him. If you have a good record, you may have to wait. If you have to bid on him, because with Edelman getting hurt, this guy moved into the slot, took Edelman's spot, caught 10 passes, was targeted 12 times yesterday by Tom Brady. And you know every team moving forward is going to lock in on Gronk. They do every week. Mm-hmm. And this is a guy that, if you know Tom Brady, any point in the field, even the red zone, he loves the slot receiver. Amendola is a guy that can really help your team. Another wide receiver that people might have forgotten about, he's owned in, I believe, 55% of leagues, is Stevie Johnson from San Diego. They were on bye last week, so a lot of people had to drop him to add other receivers into the mix. San Diego throws the ball on average 51 times a game. They're at home to Kansas City. I like Stevie Johnson as a pickup. Kamar Aiken, wide receiver we've talked about on the show before, Baltimore. He's owned in less than 30% of leagues. 14 targets yesterday. 14 targets. Baltimore's pointing out the strings. They've had a terrible year, but the one thing they like to do is throw the football, and Kamar Aiken's that guy. Now, 2 players to watch that I think are going to be back, and the first one is almost a lock to be back this week. Tony Romo is only owned in like 60% of leagues. People didn't want to sit on him for that long. Tony Romo is scheduled to start this week for the Dallas Cowboys, and obviously when Romo comes back, they're going to throw the football. Their running game with McFadden has been hit or miss, to say the least. And they're playing Miami, whose defense is awful. Romo's a great pickup. And then David Cobb, you're going to have to wait on, do some homework. They play the Thursday night game, which sucks because if it was a Sunday game, I think he'd be starting for sure. He came back 2 weeks ago, wasn't in football shape. They've been working him back into shape. Their running game's a mess. This was a high draft pick by Tennessee. They want to see him before the year's out, and they want to feature him before the year's out. They're playing Jacksonville, whose run defense is actually pretty good on Thursday, but even so, lock him up now, and if he doesn't play a ton this Thursday, watch him, and maybe a week from Sunday, if you've got a spot where you can hide him, he might be really good for you. David Cobb, of course, a former Gopher. We just saw Max Williams score his first touchdown in the league yesterday. We'll see if David Cobb in the next 2 weeks can find pay dirt as well. God, I love fantasy football because
Amen.
Tonight's a game like if I didn't have a fantasy football fix, I'd have no interest. I mean, Cincy is far superior to Houston. Houston's, other than J.J. Watt, hard to watch. But I sit, and I'm telling you, I'm so mad right now because that last touchdown the Giants thought they scored that they took away from Odell Beckham.
Yeah, that was horrible.
Manning's my quarterback. Would have got him all kinds of bonus points plus the touchdown pass. And then I'm going against the Arizona kicker in that league. He puts up 13 last night. So bottom line is I'm down 18.5 points, and all I've got left is DeAndre Hopkins. His team is done, which on paper sounds really good because he's averaging in the low 20s this year.
Right.
But since he's really good on defense and he's really the only guy that can beat them,
right,
they're going to be locking down on DeAndre. I need at least one touchdown, and I need 100 yards at least to have a chance. We'll see. It's tonight. It's everything for me in this fantasy game. And that's why I'm going to lock in and watch every snap of that game. I've got my daughters on Mondays and Tuesdays. They have to do homework, so I'm kind of the monitor of the
spaghetti dad.
Yeah. Well, tonight we're going to eat out. I don't feel like cooking tonight.
Oh.
Well, it's crummy weather. It just feels like a pizza night to me.
Can I come over for pizza?
Stop on over. Right out in Minnetonka. Not the good part on the lake. We're on the bad part of Minnetonka. But there's no real bad part of Minnetonka. We're happy to be where we are. We're just not on the lake. People say, oh, Minnetonka, you must have a huge house. No, townhouse about 4 miles away from the lake. But we can drive down there and shop and go to movies and everything else. But hey, we'll be back Thursday. Kendall and I are always here for you. Thanks for being a listener. And thanks again to Coors Light and Patrick McGovern's Pub. They'll be the host spot every Thursday. When there's a Wild home game, it's 3:30. When it's a road game like it is Thursday, it's 5 o'clock. Patrick McGovern's with Coors Light specials and a great pregame party. Thanks for listening to The Sports Ticket. I'm Kevin Gork for Kendall Mark. Have a good night.